I should probably do a little intro and then we'll get into it. I'm not good at doing intros.
Well, don't worry about it. Just know we're staring directly at you.
You know, I don't on my YouTube channel, I don't do like the, hey guys, welcome back to my channel, you know.
That would get you a lot of
Usually just
viewers.
jump right into
Smash that like button and subscribe.
Exactly. Welcome to Conversely. I am your host, Scott Strosahl, and I'm excited to introduce you to two great guests and another guest, who are all now wondering which one they are.
We're really not.
Mark seems like he knows.
We're really not.
All right, so this podcast is about exploring different perspectives, converse perspectives perhaps, while conversing, but having a good time while doing it. So whether you're here to learn something new, here's some hot takes from JoLyn.
The hottest takes.
Or just enjoy some good company, we've got you covered. All right, there's my formal intro. All right, so let's get started. So in alphabetical order, so that they can't figure out who is the other guest. First up, we have Cam Fowler. Say hello, Cam.
Hello, Cam.
Perfect. So I did some Googling and wrote up an introduction for a hockey player on the Anaheim Ducks. I assume that's you.
That is me. I am the second most famous Cam Fowler on the internet.
Actually, I think you are the senior director of technical affairs and marketing at an animal health company.
Close enough, sure.
Close enough? Okay. Well, I think that's what it says on LinkedIn. So
Hasn't been updated in a while.
It shows your age when you say that you're using LinkedIn.
And it shows
Hasn't been
your
updated.
age when you say it shows your age.
Okay, that's true.
So what are you actually?
I'm just an account manager, like a sales guy, more or less. It sounds
Senior director of technical affairs and marketing sounds much better. I think you should go with
sounds
that.
much more impressive. Yeah, it sounds.
So it's an
more impressive.
animal health company. You do stuff with like making food for animals healthier, or that kind of stuff? Or?
Somewhat. The company, yeah, it's an animal health. Yeah, medicated animal feeds. They basically, their job's to keep animals healthy and try to provide nutritional supplements for animals so they can stay healthy.
Cool. Okay. Next, alphabetically, is JoLyn Ask.
Hello.
And everybody will now do their jokes about asking JoLyn something, because she's never heard those
I've never
before.
heard them. They're very original.
JoLyn is a recent high school graduate preparing to start at Iowa State University in the fall, correct?
That's correct.
It's a good school.
Thank you. I think so too.
So what is your initial major going to be, JoLyn? And I emphasize initial because, you know, most people change at some point. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm planning to study biology with a minor in psych and then directed towards like the medical side because I'm planning to get my undergrad at Iowa State and then go to Des Moines University of Osteopathic Medicine to get my DO and then eventually practice medicine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, and finally, the other guest, I wasn't supposed to say that, was I? It's Mark Strosahl. Mark is the Chief Information Security Officer, also a fancy sounding title, at a largish insurance company that will remain nameless for legal reasons, and also happens to be my little brother.
That's right. Unfortunately, that's true.
Unfortunately for you, or unfortunately for me?
We'll just
I'm
let
not sure.
the viewers figure that out.
Yeah. So, I thought before we get into the deep discussion of prisoners and game theory and economics and all that jazz, that we would do a couple of would you rather type questions just to sort of let you guys get to know each other a little better and kind of get the conversation going.
Yeah.
If you could choose, would you like to never have to sleep, or conversely, see what I did there? Never have to eat.
I think that's an easy one for me because I would choose to never sleep because I could get more stuff done, and I love to eat, so I would miss out on not needing to eat. So,
Totally.
Yeah. So for me,
And you can do other things while you eat,
Yeah.
but you can't really do much else while you
that's
sleep.
true.
Yeah, I agree with Fam. I feel like this is an easy one. Like, why would you not take the time that you're sleeping to eat food?
So that's interesting. I'm going to probably say that I would rather not eat because the idea of eating is to refuel my body. I mean, you could say sleep is that way too, but if I don't have to refuel, do I have infinite energy? I mean, do I get to continue to burn calories and not have to refuel my body? That sounds pretty great.
And if you don't eat, does that mean you don't have to worry about consuming too many calories, and so you don't need to
And am I super healthy?
work out quite as much, maybe? At least not you're worrying about your weight? Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Do you just automatically have the right vitamins you need?
Yeah, I regulate my body perfectly and don't have any problems.
Yeah.
before that power kicks in, I definitely want to lose 15 pounds though. So I'm going to say
Right, if you're
status
just
quo.
gonna stay-
Yeah, you're
yeah.
gonna stay flat.
Maybe about 15 pounds would be great.
Right.
There's a lot of unknowns to that.
Okay, next question. If I could snap my fingers and make you able to speak all languages fluently, or conversely, able to play all musical instruments perfectly, which would you choose?
I think all languages.
Yeah, that one's easy for me because I've actually thought if I had a superpower, what would it be? And it would be to speak all languages. Because at that point, being able to communicate with anyone across the world would be a tremendous advantage. So that's the easy answer for me.
Yeah.
And I think like music, like as a person that enjoys playing and listening to music, it's kind of a way to share with others and communicate with others in a different way, to feel what others are feeling through music. So if you can talk to them verbally, that also gets the point across in a different way.
It's true.
So yeah, talking to them verbally would be the most direct way.
I think I'd have to go with the languages too. I've traveled a lot, and it's always a challenge when you don't speak the language fluently, so it makes it tough. So to just be able to go anywhere you wanted to and just automatically communicate fluently with people that'd be so much fun.
Yeah.
I think, Scott, you can almost play every instrument anyway, so I mean, maybe you'd choose that one.
Yeah, he already has that superpower.
Yeah, I don't know about every instrument. I play several, yeah. Cam plays guitar or bass. I've seen him dabble on the drums a bit. JoLyn, do you play I know you sing. Do you play an instrument too? I feel like you do, but I don't remember what it is.
I do. I have the level of about a 12-year-old girl. I play the ukulele. I play a little bit of piano, and then I play a little bit of guitar, and then cello, clarinet, and violin.
Okay, that's not a little, that's a lot.
Well, like I can get my
That's
way
like
through
6
it, but I'm not a pro.
Here's the real question. How many of those instruments would other people listening say you know how to play?
Probably just like the guitar and the ukulele and maybe the piano. That's about it.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
I also play a mean cowbell.
I think Mark could even play the cowbell.
Rhythmically, probably not.
Do you play any instruments? I know you've played in the past instruments, Mark, but I don't think you do anymore, do you?
No, not really. I do have a piano, actually, just right outside my door that
Yeah.
I may choose to play someday.
Sure.
It hasn't happened yet, to be clear, but that option is always there.
Cool. All right, so those are my two questions. So now everybody knows each other. I think I would go with the languages thing too. I guess partly because I do play several instruments already, but
Yeah, I was gonna say that really wouldn't help you that much.
I don't know. I mean, in my daily life though, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to be the odd one out on that one because in my daily life, I don't feel like I would use other languages very often. Like just in my current life.
Says the person who is currently learning another language.
That's true. I am.
Yeah, yesterday you bragged about having like a 700-day streak on Duolingo.
It's almost 780. Thank you.
Sorry, 780-day streak.
But and that's the thing is I do enjoy. I learned Italian somewhat before we went to Italy a few years back, and I dabbled in learning Russian a long time ago. I know very, very little. Spasiba. That's I can say thank you. I know how to say I don't speak Russian. That's about all I know. So, but I don't feel like I interact with people very much that speak other languages. So it would be super helpful in certain situations, but I don't think in my normal life it would be. And playing all musical instruments perfectly would be very helpful in my current life.
So I feel like though it's like when you want to buy a car and you're thinking about buying a certain car and suddenly you start seeing the car everywhere. If you were more aware of understanding the languages, people probably speak them all around.
If I could speak all the languages, they would probably be very helpful. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I want to talk about the prisoner's dilemma today. This is ostensibly a game theory sort of hypothetical, but it has a lot of implications in economics and politics and all kinds of stuff in life. So there's several different versions, but the basic idea is two people have been arrested for a lesser crime. We'll call them, I don't know, Bob and Steve. Okay? Bob and Steve got arrested for a lesser crime, but the police are pretty sure they did this other worse crime, a robbery, let's say. They got them for, I don't know, a traffic violation. They were for robbery, whatever it is. The point is, they give each of them in separate rooms a choice. They say, if you confess, say Bob confesses and Steve does not, Steve will get 5 years in jail. Bob will get 0. Okay? But they tell Steve the same thing. If Steve does it, Steve will get 0, Bob will get 5. But if they both confess, then they're going to get both of them 3 years because they cooperated with the police, right? So they get 3 years each. If neither one of them confesses, they're going to end up only getting charged with the lesser crime and get 1 year each. Okay? So it makes sense? So if they neither confesses, they each get 1. If one of them confesses, they get 0 and the other gets 5. If they both confess, they both get 3.
So do they have the same last name? I feel like that's important information.
So we're going to assume that they don't have any loyalty towards each other. There's no reason that they are concerned about each other in this initial scenario. So here's the problem. Think about it from either one of those perspectives. Let's say Bob's perspective, okay? If Steve confesses, our options are confess and get 3 years, or don't confess and get 5.
Mm-hmm.
If Steve doesn't confess, my options are to confess and get 0. Steve's in trouble, but I'm getting 0. He's getting 5. Or I don't confess and I get 1. So regardless of what Steve does, Bob's best bet is to confess, right? It comes out better for him either way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it works the same way for Steve. So for both of them individually, regardless of what the other person does, they should confess. So logically then, they would both confess and get 3 years each, which is actually working out worse for both of them than if they just cooperated, because they're both going to get 3 years instead of 1. And together, they're getting a total of 6 years instead of 2. So the interesting dilemma is, individually, selfishly, they should confess. But for the whole, it's better if they don't. But they don't really have any incentive to do that. Now, can get applied to economics. You could imagine like a quick trip across the street from a Casey's gas station, right? And individually, they're better off, well, if I put the gas $3.98 instead of $4, we're going to get more people coming to our gas station. But then they're both interested in reducing the price like that, when actually it'd be better off for them both if they just said, let's just leave it at $4. We'll each get half of the business. We'll make more money because we're charging more.
So it ends up, this is applicable to a lot of like real world situations.
Yep. So now the question becomes, what should their strategy be? Do you think they should confess? Should they not confess?
They should not confess because snitches get stitches.
There you go.
So they definitely should not confess.
I think the challenge is not how many years they get. The challenge is, can you actually go to jail, be in jail, and for the record, I've never been to jail, but I've watched enough jail movies to know that it's really, really hard to get out of jail without getting in trouble while you're in jail. Like, the people around you cause problems.
True.
They're in there because they caused problems. So 1 year, 3 year, or 5 year might turn into 10 in the end either way. So the path that leads to 0 is really the only path that I'd be shooting for and trying to get my partner to do the same.
Yep. And so, of course, it makes a difference if you're talking about prisoners going to jail, if you're talking about a business setting prices for things. It depends on the situation, right? Like, what are the stakes? And, of course, like you said, do they have the same last name? Are they brothers, right? Do they have a connection? Do they have a reason to care about what happens to the other person? Mm-hmm. Where it really gets interesting is the iterative prisoner's dilemma. So when you're going to do it multiple times, if you're just doing a one-off, the best thing to do is be selfish, right? But what if you're going to potentially do this multiple times, right? I'm going to do more robberies with Steve in the future or whatever, right? Now I have to care what he thinks because he's going to act differently based on what I've done, right?
Yeah.
So you would think that this reminds me of a book by Chris Voss. It's called Never Split the Difference. And he was the top FBI hostage negotiator. And his point is that it is never acceptable in a hostage negotiation to meet in the middle. Like, you're always trying to get them to come to your approach because death of 2 people out of 10 is not acceptable. So, like, you can't split what you want and get 5 people back, let them take 4 people or 5 people if it's 10, and then get on a bus and leave. Like that. So his approach is very much, you need to be able to argue and bring it back to what you need. And so I think if you apply it to the prisoner situation, it's interesting because you should be always shooting for what's best for you, even if it leads to mutual destruction.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting approach if you apply it backwards to that.
And then based on that, then you would say you wouldn't confess, right? You wouldn't want to meet in the middle, so to speak. Is that what you're saying,
would
Mark?
be, but that would be the difference. There is, the book is about influencing others and having that one-on-one discussion. In the scenario where you're in two separate rooms, you're Scott, your question of what's your strategy? Well, that to me that implies you actually have a chance to communicate with each other or provide or come up with a strategy. Mm-hmm. And then the other side of that is how trusting can you be if the other person is incentivized the opposite direction. So I think influence is a huge topic alone and very difficult to do with somebody you've never met that you are already committing a crime with or have committed a crime with.
Yeah, and in this hypothetical, thought experiment, they aren't allowed to communicate with each other. That's the idea, which of course is not realistic, right? In real life, most situations this would be applied to, Casey's and Quick Trip across the street from each other. The gas stations could talk to each other, right? They might not, but they certainly could.
Well, they actually couldn't though in pricing because of antitrust laws. So that would actually be anti-competition. So they can't actually communicate on pricing.
Well, they're not supposed to.
Even though they put a giant sign up that they can see the pricing right across the street.
Yeah. Well, and so it does kind of work out there because, like you said, they can't directly communicate, but they kind of can. They could both just, so one of the things that they've done some tournaments, as they call them, where you come up with a strategy and they do, say, 100, 200 rounds of this is my strategy, this is their strategy. We're going to say, do we choose to cooperate or defect is what they call it. So cooperating would be not snitching. Defecting would be snitching, basically. And both sides decide what they're going to do independently and then go from there. And you have to come up with a strategy. The way they've done it, it's not like a person sitting there doing it. It's, here's my strategy. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And if this happens, I'm doing that, It gets really interesting there because, like you said, they've got their signs out up there. They're putting the prices up on a sign, right? And that's kind of the same thing of defecting or cooperating, right? Because they put their price up. When you put yours up, you're either cooperating or defecting, right?
Yeah,
like you're
exactly.
either agreeing with their price or going lower.
Yeah. If they raise their price and then you don't follow suit and raise your price, then, like you said, you're defecting at that point.
Right.
Or if you lower your price, then you're defecting as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what do you think would be a good strategy?
I have a question. Does it matter if you actually committed the crime or not?
Oh, true.
Are you actually guilty of the crime that you're
That's a good
confessing
question. In the hypothetical situation, they are guilty.
Okay.
But yeah, and I think the prisoner side of it is really not even the point, like the crime side of it, because they're of course applying this to lots of other things. It applies to game theory and economics and stuff. But that's a good point. And really, I don't know. From a purely what's your best outcome situation, it wouldn't matter because if you confess, you're getting the 5 years or the 3 years or the whatever. Yeah. And if you don't confess, you're getting this. It's not really based on whether you did it or not in the hypothetical. Yeah. But certainly there's lots of moral things that come into this, right? Like, should I snitches get stitches, right? Like, should I do this if it might harm somebody else? And they've also done some tests with this where they did a similar type of game and had people play it. And the ideal strategy is everyone should always defect. That's just, it's always better for you if you defect. But a bunch of people usually choose not to defect, even though they don't know who the person is on the other side. They don't know who they are, but it's more like, well, I don't know what they're going to do. They might be, I'm going to trust that they're going to be nice. I'm going to be nice too. I don't want to make them, that kind of thing.
I think you see it played out a lot of times in like shows like if you watch any shows like Survivor and stuff where they form coalitions and then they defect, sometimes they go against their best interests or what the best interests of the group are. And so it is very interesting to me because you do see sometimes people act maybe not in their own best self-interest sometimes, and then sometimes you see them act very selfishly as you'd sort of expect them to. And so it's tough to know exactly how people are going to act, because they sometimes will do one thing versus the other, like in that. So it's because it's that uncertainty in the prisoner's dilemma, right? You just don't know what the other guy's going to do. Is he going to act in his own best self-interest, or is he going to confess to try and lower the overall, make the best thing for outcome for everyone?
And a lot of times, so like in Survivor, like you said, they'll have a coalition. Well, sometimes it kind of feels like if somebody is going to break the coalition, you want to be the one to do it, right? And so you're incentivized kind of to be the one that does it. So let's say you're going to do this tournament thing. And of course, people spent lots of time and, really thought it through, and you guys just got this thrown at you. So clearly, I don't expect you guys to have the best plan. But what would you think be some strategies that you could do? Of course, there's the obvious ones like always cooperating or always defecting. And always defecting is the optimal situation, as expected from what we've done, until people start using other strategies that punish defection, right? Like in your Survivor example, if you jump ship too early, now you're out, not in your coalition, but the other group doesn't want you either. You end up getting punished for defecting, right? Or snitches get stitches. You get punished for snitching.
Yeah, people punish you.
Yeah.
It's a game of probability a little bit too. Like you mentioned at the beginning that these two individuals don't know each other well. And in those situations, you have a much higher probability of people taking an action that's in their best interest. And so I think you have to expect that the other person is going to be acting in their best interest. And so then you're strategizing based on that expectation. It's the door problem of like at the beginning you don't know something and then you have more information as you go. So I would be trying to get more information out of the people accusing us, like the cops because then at that point you might develop more of a strategy or change your strategy based on the information you have at hand. So you could also feed them false information to see what they do with it. So,
yeah.
We were at that place in the jewelry store, and maybe it's not the jewelry store. Maybe he gets that information from the cop. Yeah, we know you were at the jewelry store. I mean, he'd be like, wait a second. That was false information. He's feeding them false information. So you could game it a lot of ways.
Yep. So in what they've done is they've turned this into a tournament thing where you literally don't know the other person. Mm-hmm. The only things you can do is say defect or cooperate. Those are your only options. Defect or cooperate, round one, and you get essentially points instead of years in jail. It's the same idea, right? But it works out the same. Say 5, 3, and 1, and 0. And then you do another round, and you say cooperate or defect, and then cooperate or defect, and you do this 100, 200 times.
Do you see the other person's response?
You know what the other person did, you know what your score was,
Okay.
And then you choose again. So all you can choose is cooperate or defect over and over and over again.
So people change their answer over time based on...
Sure. Yep.
And eventually but my assumption is they change to the point where they're finally in their best interest, and they both stick with that going forward. They're learning from past mistake.
Or conversely, people like Cam and Mark have said, people always act in the selfish interest. Then after repeated selfish interest failing them, because if both of them act selfishly, both prisoners act selfishly, then they're going to get 3 years in prison. Then after time, if they go through this multiple times, then they might start to realize, hey, if we both act as a team, like selflessly, we can get a better result.
Yep. So if you think about it, they're going to do better if they always cooperate than if they're fighting against each other. But individually, you're going to do better if you manage to defect when they cooperate more often than they defect when you cooperate.
So I think of the game of Risk or other games where you have like 3 or 4 people involved, and at some point you're not going to be the winner. So do you determine and you intentionally take other people out? So I'm one of those that in the game, if I'm like the second person to go out, I will try and take out another person to speed up the entire game, even though it makes them mad, because then they can't win.
That's how you tell you're a younger brother. That right there.
I am also a younger brother, and I also do the same thing. So maybe there is something to that.
I think there's.
But yeah, it's my secondary goal. So if I can't win the game, I always then try to find something else to make the game still fun, right? So,
take down as many people with you as you can.
Yeah, take somebody out.
Now Risk is an interesting example of this too, because if you're playing with multiple people, sometimes you cooperate with someone, you kind of team up. So, if Mark and I are teaming up against Cam, there's going to be a point where Cam's basically done, and there's this incentive or pull for Mark and I to maybe go against the other one.
Power struggle.
I'm going to go against Mark when he's still going against Cam, so that way once Cam's gone, I'm in a better position. So there's this part where we're kind of cooperating, but maybe we're incentivized not to. But
as soon as you take that first cut, all bets are off. Like you immediately destroyed any trust that you had at that point, and it's very, very hard to get it back.
Well, interestingly, one of the strategies in this tournament that they did back in the 80s was what was some people would call the grudge situation. So I'm going to always cooperate. That's my strategy. I'm going to cooperate. As soon as the other person defects, I'm going to defect the rest of the time. That's one strategy. So as long as you're cooperating, I'm cooperating too. But as soon as you defect, I'm going to defect the rest of the time because now I'm mad, kind of thing, right? And that is a better strategy.
So you don't have to tell us yet, but what was the winning strategy?
Right. So there was a winning strategy. I'm curious if you guys have other ideas for strategies.
Yeah.
So I had a thought was because it's somewhat, like you said, there's the punishment strategy or not. I wondered how you would do if you just randomly picked. If you just said, I'll randomly pick, roll a die, and 1 and 2 is all right. What was I only can defect and not defect? So flip a coin. Heads is defect, tails is I cooperate. I just wondered how that would do because then at least they throw some randomness in there.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
I don't see how you could win with that though, but I do think it would like throw off the other people's strategy because they'd be like, well, he should cooperate this time. And you're like, well, he didn't. He defected. And they're like, he should defect this time. No, he didn't.
Sure.
So,
well,
I don't know.
One thing that's interesting is the winning strategy was a very simple strategy.
Was it to like copy what they did the last time? So if they defected the last time, you defect. And if they cooperated, you cooperate?
Exactly.
Hey, there we go. JoLynn staying out of prison.
So it's called tit for tat. So you just copy the opponent's previous play because what happens is they defect, you defect. Mm-hmm. And so it punishes them right away. Yep. But as soon as they cooperate, then you cooperate again. So you're also more forgiving. Because if the grudge one, right? If you just say, I'm going to defect the rest of the time, well, they're just going to defect the rest of the time too, right? I mean,
they're gonna get the
if
pattern.
they figure out that's kind of what you're doing, yeah. And the other interesting thing about that is tit for tat, if you apply it to lots of different situations, it doesn't need to have any foresight, really, right? It doesn't care what you're doing next. It doesn't need to try to predict or look ahead. It also doesn't need much memory, right? It doesn't have to remember what happened 20 moves ago. It's just, all it cares about is what did you do last move? That's what I'm doing. It doesn't keep track of anything behind. It doesn't predict what you're going to do. It's really interesting.
Scott, do you know, have they played this out with any of the like real world scenarios, like the gas station, like the pricing model? Do you know of any places they've done that where the tit for tat, does that work in say pricing?
I don't know. I think it's more theoretical game theory stuff, but it should work out, right?
Yeah, the incentives are kind of the same.
So if I'm Casey's across from Quick Trip, and anybody who's not from the Midwest is going to be like, what is this Casey's thing they're talking about? But
they have good pizza.
But anyways, it's a gas station.
With the best pizza.
They have good pizza. Yeah. So if Casey's lowers their price, right? Let's say $4 is the price, the normal price. That's the cooperative price, right? If Casey's drops it down to $3.97, and then Quick Trip drops theirs to $3.97. Well, they're both going to realize pretty quick, I think, well, we can't keep just dropping our prices down, right? So maybe Casey's, so they might stay there, but Casey's might be like, okay, we tried, it didn't work out for us. Let's go back to $4. They go back to $4, And if they both keep it at $3.97, then they're just going to keep keeping it at $3, right? Because they're going to keep defecting, essentially.
Yeah.
think that's price equilibrium.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking it's kind of like a wave effect.
Yeah.
Like if you go down, they're gonna go down.
Every time one goes down, the other one goes down to match. Eventually, they're going to be like, well, this isn't doing us any good.
I'm gonna go back up.
Go back up. And if you start to go back up and they come back up too, you're going to say, oh, well, if I could go up a little more, I could go up a little more, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to probably, every time you go down, they go down. So it's not getting you an advantage. And if you go up, they go up. Now we're both making more money.
Yeah.
Whereas the grudge one, if I lower my price, you lower your price, and I say, okay, I tried, it didn't work, I'll go back up, and then you keep yours down, well, now I'm just going to go back down again, right? Like, we're both making less money.
But that is an effective strategy as well that people use in business when they are the much bigger player and they're bleeding out the smaller.
Sure. And that's assuming that they're not on equal footing, right?
Yeah. Because like the prisoner experiment, you're both facing the same end result.
They're both on equal standing. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. In business, if I have higher margins, I'll lower my price because I know they can't do the same thing and make money, right?
Exactly.
There's always different constraints compared to a kind of simplistic model that we're dealing with.
Yeah, of course, in real life, it's always much more complicated.
Much more,
and maybe the owners of the two businesses are cousins and they have history.
I don't know, but all these movies make you believe that the mafia boss prison is like great for them. They can still do all their business from there. They get to talk to the guards and get whatever they need. So maybe it isn't equal.
That's true. Maybe you just committed a robbery with the mafia boss and you're screwed.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you do.
Another thing that I thought was interesting from their little tournament was not only did Tit for Tat win, the top strategies, the ones that were the top like 8, I think, or so, were all what would be considered friendly strategies, or they all start by cooperating. They don't immediately go with defecting. They start by cooperating. Those were all the winning ones. And all of the ones that started by being selfish and defecting were the not good strategies in the end.
Are you saying there's a moral thing to this?
Not necessarily, but you could read that into it, yes.
I think you could.
They did another tournament. I don't remember. I want to say later in the 80s. I don't know. I don't have the date. But there was a lot more people that entered strategies. And they changed it a little bit because the first one, it was like, was it 100 or 200? It was a certain number of rounds. And you can kind of use the number of rounds as a little bit, if you know how many rounds there are. Like the last round, you might as well defect, right? Because you're not going to get punished for it.
True.
So there's no reason not to defect in the last round. So they changed it so you didn't know how many rounds it was going to be, which makes a little bit of a difference on your strategizing. So a whole bunch of things. There was one that was like tit for tat, but they called it like forgiving tit for tat. So basically, I'm going to do what you do, but if you defect, I'm not going to defect unless you do it twice in a row. If you defect twice in a row, then I'm going to defect. And that sounds good, sort of. It works pretty well until people know that that's a strategy that exists. Because then they have a strategy called tester. Tester will do a defect and see what happens. And if you don't defect, then they'll go back to they'll do a defect and then cooperate. What'd they do? Oh, they didn't defect. Okay. And it will just defect, cooperate, defect, cooperate, defect, cooperate. And the other one will just cooperate the whole time. Right? Because you can never get 2 in a row.
That's fair.
So it didn't win. Tit for tat still won.
Yeah.
So anybody listening to this, if you're in grade school and somebody punches you, you're supposed to punch them back based on this strategy is what I'm learning.
Right away.
Tit for tat.
Right away.
And give them a minute and be like, are you going to punch me again?
So, I mean, honestly, that's kind of what it's telling us is if someone punches you, you should punish them somehow. That doesn't necessarily mean punch them back. It could be punch them back, right? It could be tell on them, right?
That's the recommended strategy for this person, just to be clear.
We'd like to make the record clear. We do not condone punching people.
We don't condone violence.
No.
But the point is you should punish them. And it does make sense, right? What do we say about, I mean, that's what you always say with bullies, right? You can't just let a bully keep bullying you, right?
Crime and punishment is the whole point.
You've got to do something to stop it, right? You've got to stand up for yourself somehow. So punish them. But also this tells us you should be quick to forgive if they forgive. Don't hold a grudge, right?
True. So there is a moral thing to this.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah. Another interesting place where this prisoner's dilemma is actually good for society, the fact that the prisoner's dilemma is the case. Think about an oil cartel, okay? They're cooperating, right? They're agreeing we're going to limit how much we're willing to sell because we're going to keep the supply low to keep the prices high so we all make a lot of money. Well, they're always incentivized. If we say we're all going to sell 100 barrels a month, well, I might think, man, if I sell 103, I'm going to make more money and it's not really going to change much, right? But we're all tempted to do that. So they're constantly being tempted not to cooperate, just like this. Mm-hmm. And so it actually works out well that they're tempted not to cooperate and that they should defect because it will increase the supply and bring down the price. Because even though it's going to bring down the price, they're still going to make more money.
Yeah.
Because I could say, I could sell these at 100. I could do 105 of them. A little cheaper, still going to come out ahead. I'm better off doing that.
Doesn't this also apply to nuclear bombs?
It kind of does.
Couldn't you say that this is countries fighting wars and, you know, if you send in your tanks and they get destroyed or your ships or whatever, like there's levels of we're both willing to lose our queen on the chessboard or whatever, but like the king is too big of a price. And so what's your price you're willing to lose, and then what's your decision or strategy that stays within that safe space for you?
Yep, for sure. And this is kind of goes back to the whole first strike thing, right? We don't want to be attacked first, so we'd better hit them first before they hit us. And you're almost incentivized
to hit first
because otherwise you're behind and you're trying to catch up. And yeah, for sure. Or imagine racers running a race, right? We're all at the start line. But no one is starting us. We start when the first person goes is the start of the race. Mm-hmm. Well, you want to be the first one to go, right?
This is the grade school, I'll race you to the end of the block.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
I think you see this in racing, like it's an interesting comparison with Formula One racing because you have a lot of each team can enter two cars in every race. And I watched a series on this recently. It's a Netflix show, and it's incredible how many times teammates crash each other. Like I couldn't believe it because it's in their best interest. Like if they're 1-2 or even 3-4 in the points, it's incredibly important for them to work together and maintain their position or advance together. But they will fight each other for that 1 point or those couple of points they're going to get as an individual because they individually want to win the championship. And so it's really surprising to me that there's at least 2 or 3 times in that season or in the series you've seen teammates crash each other and then they're both out of the points for doing it. And so it's like a prisoner's dilemma on steroids because they go from like nothing in a race to, you know, they could have done very, very well together. It's just surprising.
But I would also argue that conversely, that in that situation, they have been bred from very, very young age to be number one. And so anything other than number one is not acceptable.
True.
And so there's a little bit of a different mindset that if you even consider yourself being okay not being number one, that you lose your seat or you lose your edge and you're out of Formula One. It is a great series, though. I've watched it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good point because you're right. They can lose their seat pretty easily. Yeah. So that's a good point.
I think going off of what Mark said, you can even relate that to like the American mindset of capitalism, that these companies are competing for gas prices. Like everybody wants to be number one. Nobody wants to be number two. They want to be the person that Americans think of as the first place to go get gas. Like nobody's thinking, oh, I'm going to go down to like, I don't know, a cheap gas place. The one with the green dinosaur, something like that.
Dynaco.
Thank you.
Sinclair.
Not Dynaco's the one from Cars.
It's
Sinclair,
Cars,
but
yeah.
it's the Cars version. That's actually what I was thinking, but I didn't want to show my age. So, but anyway, I think that the capitalistic society that we live in, everybody wants to be the best, so everybody's willing to push other people down to be the best.
That's kind of true. There's another interesting thing called the something commons. I don't remember what it's called. Something about the commons, but the general idea, it's like the prisoner's dilemma. Let's say there's a field. It's just an open field. Anybody can use it, okay? And there's a certain amount of grass, and it can support a certain number of sheep grazing on it, right? And if you get too many, then the field will start to fall apart, and the health of the sheep won't be as good. So it can hold, 6 sheep or whatever. And there's several farmers that have sheep that are going to graze there. it's easy to see that obviously they should limit it to 6 to keep the field fresh and keep their sheep healthy. And that would be the best for everyone, right? But each individual farmer says, yeah, but if I put one extra sheep there, yes, the field's going to be a little less healthy and my sheep are going to be a little less healthy and I'm not going to be able to, get as much wool from them, but I'll have one more sheep that's grazing. So even if I'm getting, 97% of the wool from each sheep, I've got one more sheep. So each farmer is incentivized to put one more sheep and then the other one more, and they're all going to keep putting one more sheep out there. Because it's always better for me if I add one more sheep, and then eventually the field's gone and the sheep are unhealthy. And
it's very similar to a community garden. Like they all take care of their own little space, they have access, but eventually somebody, maybe even not one of the gardeners, comes in and takes people's food.
Yeah, so it's not even, capitalism obviously is an example, but it kind of works out, I think, just in general in life. There's lots of situations where the best thing for you is to be selfish, but the best thing for everyone as a whole is for everyone to cooperate.
Doesn't it come down to the difference is prisoner's dilemma is, if you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think that's Maslow.
Yep,
anyway,
it's Maslow.
I don't remember how to pronounce his name, but this is about safety and having a place. It's very different if you're in thinking about going to jail and losing everything you have versus another sheep that's going to get less healthy.
Sure.
Like I can live if my sheep die, but I can't be somewhere else having a job, raising kids, getting, making more money if I'm in prison. So there's a difference there between the fight flight and the safety part of it than the gas station raising their price a little bit more.
Right. A prisoner's dilemma in the original idea of going to jail is, of course, much higher stakes than some of these other ones. Yeah.
But I think, Mark, to your point, what you're trying to make is that because sometimes we either can justify or the stakes seem much lower, then it becomes much easier to act in our own self-interest at that point. So whether it's OPEC, producing an OPEC country says, I'm only going to produce 100,000 barrels. And then said, we'll do 103,000. It's not a big deal. Because the ramifications of that are not that serious, right? What happens? I made a little more money. Nobody really gets hurt. So it's kind of like you were saying with the sheep, one more sheep. So Mark, I think it's a great point because it's like how serious the consequences for your actions are do dictate a little bit about how selfish you're going to be when you make a decision.
Yeah, but the theory says that they're going to do a little bit more, which is going to make someone else do a little bit more, and then it snowballs and it becomes a bigger consequence, even though initially it's smaller consequence, right?
I don't remember the term, but in sociology, there's a study of this, that there's these rules that we live in our society, and as long as everybody stays in the rules, it's going to be okay. But if somebody even stretches the rules a little bit, then everybody else feels the allowance to stretch more, and it just leads to total anarchy.
It's stop signs, it's everything that we take for granted, that you just behave that way because you've been raised that way and it's safety for others. But there's always somebody out there who's like, you know what? It's probably in the country. I don't feel like stopping at a stop sign. This happened when we were growing up down the street. Somebody ran a stop sign like every day leaving their house. And finally there was somebody that they T-boned and killed. And it does really affect society if one person steps out of the norm there.
Yeah. I think that's where it comes full circle back to the prisoner's dilemma. Like that's why we have like cause and effect, like crime and punishment, because we know that even something so little as robbing a jewelry store for one ring can lead to somebody committing a heinous crime.
Yeah, because the tit for tat strategy tells us that you need to be punished for defecting, right? Mm-hmm. But then also forgiven. So, somebody does a crime, they get arrested, they do their time, then they should be.
Does this make a case for punishing, like, being more strict on punishing like smaller petty crimes then? Does that have any ramification for that?
I don't know. The tit for tat thing sort of implies maybe, in the game theory part of it, the way they have it set up, there was no levels of punishment, and it was just either cooperate or defect. And that is interesting. I'm sure people have done that where there's different levels. of cooperation and defection, it would get complicated really fast. I'm sure somebody's done that. I'm not familiar with that, but it would be interesting to know how that changes the strategy. Should your punishment be equal or a little less, a little more than their defection, right?
Yeah, I think that like it's a cruel and unusual punishment is like a big thing that we talk about in our country. Like when it started, but now today, like punishing equal to the crime. So like petty crime should be punished equal to their crime. Or should they be a little bit more so that you can make them think that they shouldn't do that? Because if they steal like $100 from a cash register and you fine them $100, they're going to be like, oh, well, I'm walking away with the same thing. But if you fine them $250, then they have some incentive to not do it.
If all your out is what you gained, then you might as well try it, right?
Yeah.
If I know that if I steal $100, I'm only going to lose the $100, then clearly I'm going to steal the $100 because there's a chance I'll get away with it, right?
Yeah.
Or if you just chop off everybody's hand for any crime, crime goes down overall. And then you have a lot of people walking around with one hand.
That's a great solution, Mark. Then we'll know who the criminals are.
But that's kind of, in some ways, kind of like the grudge thing, where once you defect, I'm going to defect the rest of the time. I feel like that's a similar kind of thing where, like, if you do one smaller crime, I'm going to really punish you heavily. That doesn't end up working out for the society in the long run, according to this game theory.
Yeah, who's going to support all the people in the society that don't have hands? The people that were good to begin with.
This is a great analogy, Mark.
What's the quote? An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind.
Yep.
Except that's not entirely true. There'd be one guy with one eye still at the end, right?
With only one eye, though.
Or a lot of angry blind people.
Yeah. So of course, once you start putting, morals and that kind of stuff in it, makes a big difference on the whole situation. Because then you have some incentive. I have some incentive to do the right thing for you and not just selfishly for myself.
It's interesting that such a relatively simple set of rules could come up with such a complex outcome. There's not a whole lot to it. So it's kind of like it's very chaotic to know. You can't really know intuitively like what's the right thing to do. Seems like it should be easy, but it's much more complicated.
I also feel like they should conduct this with prisoners, like people who are actually in a situation similar.
Oh, people that have faced it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Because once you know what the punishment's going to be, like as a lame person that has never been to prison, you can only imagine what it's like. But if you've been to prison, your decision might be different.
I'm in prison right now. This is myself.
You're Back to the Future poster.
You have the Back to the Future cell.
Yeah, it's the movie theme cell.
Yeah, that's the poster is hiding your hole, right?
Yeah, Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyways, I think we're way past Mark's bedtime. So
no, I actually already have that superpower that I don't need to sleep. So
the superpower.
Yeah, that's what we picked at the beginning.
Yep,
that's true. We all you wanted to not have to eat.
Yeah.
We wanted to not sleep.
But I chose to.
He's changed his mind.
This is true, yes. Right now, the other one sounds better.
You don't need to have a bedtime snack. You just need the bedtime. You just don't need the bedtime snack.
That's right. I just need the sleep.
I've thought before, forget eating or sleeping. Imagine a future with some technological advancement where there's no need to eliminate waste or use the restroom. How would that change society? That's a whole nother podcast, I guess.
Tune in next time.
That's our topic for next time.
I feel like that's the one that so many things for me, not having to sleep would be great. Not having to eat would be good. But there's so much of our world and everything that revolves around bathroom breaks. And we've got to make sure we have public restrooms. And where are we going? We've got to drag bathrooms out to the field for our big festival that we're having. If people didn't have to use the bathroom, that would change so much.
And the jobs that waste management has.
Jobs, yeah, so much.
That Woodstock concert that they had would have been a lot more comfortable if they hadn't had to go to the bathroom.
And think about how many diseases in the past, plagues and all kinds of stuff that came just because. Still today, people that have water quality issues, not just because of that, but sometimes that's the whole reason. So
Absolutely.
That could be
The
huge.
world would be overpopulated.
World could be overpopulated. That's a good, valid argument.
Topic for next time, Scott.
Yeah, maybe. And speaking of topics for next time, if you have a suggestion for what you'd like to hear us talk about here on Conversely, head over to the website, conversely.fm, and you can give us a suggestion of something you'd like to hear.
Do you wonder what a world would be like without waste? Scott does.
I do. I've thought about that on multiple occasions.
Every time Scott's using the restroom, he's thinking about what it would be like.
I can honestly say I have never thought
Me
about
neither.
that. Not one time.
one.
There's just so many times that it's revolved. I mean, what's the classic thing? We're getting ready to leave. You'd better stop. You better go to the bathroom before we leave. We're not going to stop right away. How often do we have to stop? Where can we? There's whole websites devoted to the best public restrooms.
Having had a job in the summer where I worked at a landfill, whenever you say waste, I'm thinking of that waste, not human waste. That's a whole nother one by itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Worst job ever.
So thank you, Cam and JoLyn and Mark, and the other one. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
We'll have
Scott.
to do it again sometime.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Time to go to sleep. I'll see you guys later.
See ya.
Night.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
I don't know how to wrap this up. That's the good question. I didn't think about that. I thought about how to start it, not how to wrap it up.
Well, conversely, I think it needs to end.
Tune in next time when we discuss not having to go to the bathroom.